The mist from the Thames had barely settled when Miss Rosalie Carne made her decision to leave England forever. Clutching her woven traveling bag as she stood on the sodden wooden dock, her eyes fixed on the paddle steamer that would carry her to America and away from the ruin that had brought her to this desperate edge. The steamer's whistle cut through the fog, a harsh shriek signaling the end of her life in London. She placed one gloved hand on the gangway, ready to vanish. But just as she took the step, a commanding voice cracked with an emotion she had never heard in a ballroom. "Miss Carne, wait, please!" She froze. A towering figure emerged from the gray haze, Corin Trevithick, the Duke of Calstock. His silk top hat and tailored coat were immaculate, but his storm-gray eyes were raw with desperation. He grasped her hand, ignoring the gasps of the dock workers. "I cannot let you sail without begging you," he breathed, his voice trembling. "Stay and give me a chance." Hey, loves, before we dive deeper, if this moment already has your heart racing, smash that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight, London, New York, Lagos, Manila, and subscribe so we can keep sharing these swoony historical romances. My little nephew swears if we hit 1,000 new subscribers this month, he'll finally stop hiding my phone charger. Help a girl out. She had come to London 2 seasons ago with such hope, the orphaned daughter of the scholarly Cornish gentleman, believing she could secure a future that honored her mind as much as her lineage. Her father had warned her about the rigidity of the ton, but Rosalie had been determined to prove she was more than just a pretty ornament meant for a silent marriage. At 21, she wanted partnership and intellectual purpose. What she found instead was a society that did not want a woman who debated philosophy or questioned the laws of inheritance. The ballrooms had been polite enough at first, but when she refused the advances of Lord Haworth, a man 3 times her age with a cruel streak, and continued to voice her opinions on reform, the whispers began. Within months, Haworth had orchestrated a vicious rumor that left her reputation in tatters. The damp spring wind of 1818 now cut through her blue-striped traveling dress, a sensible garment that had seemed so practical when she packed it in her cold lodgings, but felt woefully inadequate against the harsh reality of exile. She adjusted her bonnet with trembling fingers, trying to maintain the composure her father had instilled in her. Carne women did not weep in public. They certainly did not cry over shattered dreams on damp docks surrounded by strangers. The steamer's engine rumbled and groaned, releasing great clouds of coal smoke into the gray sky. Rosalie checked her reticule the 3rd time, counting the few coins she had left after purchasing her ticket. It would be barely enough to survive until she found work as a governess, and then she would have to face the terrifying unknown of a new world, alone. But it was better than facing society's pity, her financial ruin, and worst of all, the satisfaction in Lord Haworth's eyes if she stayed to beg for charity. "All ashore that's going ashore," the captain called, his voice carrying across the wet planks. Rosalie picked up her bag, grateful it was not heavier, and prepared to board. She believed no one in England knew the real her. But the Duke had been watching, and in that single scandalous moment on the dock, he risked everything to ask for the one thing society said he should simply take, her willing heart. But would a duke truly humble himself for a ruined woman, or is this just another aristocratic whim? The season of 1818 was meant to be her triumph. Instead, it became her execution. Rosalie Carne sat in the dark interior of the hired hackney carriage, the damp London air clinging to her skin like the shame that had been draped upon her shoulders. 2 months ago, she had been a curiosity, the bright-eyed Cornish girl with the copper hair and the dangerous habit of quoting Mary Wollstonecraft. Now she was a pariah. The debts her father left behind were a burden she might have managed, but the venom Lord Halworth spat when she rejected his lecherous proposal had proved impossible to scrub away. He had painted her not just as poor, but as loose, a woman of compromised virtue whose poverty was a moral failing rather than a circumstance. The carriage lurched to a halt at the East India docks, the smell of brine and coal smoke assaulting her senses. Rosalie stepped down, the mud instantly staining the hem of her blue-striped traveling dress. She clutched her woven carpet bag, her knuckles white against the leather handle. To stay in England meant accepting a life as a scullery maid, or worse, becoming the mistress of some lesser man just to survive. America was terrifying, a vast, lawless expanse, but it was clean. It was a place where the name Carn meant nothing and where the whispers of the ton could not reach. Fog curled around the twin smokestacks of the paddle steamer, the vessel groaning against the tide as if eager to be gone. Rosalie presented her ticket to the purser, her hand trembling. The finality of it choked her. She was really doing this. She was vanishing. She turned back one last time, not to look at the city that had rejected her, but to bid a silent farewell to the girl she used to be. "Miss Carn!" The voice was deep, resonant, and entirely out of place amidst the rough shouts of sailors and dock workers. She froze, one foot on the gangplank. Surely she was hallucinating. But then boots rang out against the wet wood, fast, heavy, urgent steps. A figure cut through the swirling gray mist, Corin Trevithick, the Duke of Calstock. He looked nothing like the icy, untouchable peer who had watched the season's frivolities from the perimeter of every ballroom. His tall silk top hat was crooked, his breathing labored, and his storm-gray eyes burned with a terrifying intensity. He stopped inches from her, effectively blocking her escape to the ship. He did not look at the swaying vessel. He only looked at her, as if she were the only solid thing in the world. "I cannot let you sail," he said, the words tumbling out, stripping away his ducal reserve. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near hers before daring to clasp it. The contact sent a shock through her that rivaled the cold river wind. "I know I have no right. I know the world has turned its back. But please, stay and give me a chance." Rosalie stared up at him, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was the Duke of Calstock, a man whose wealth could buy half of London, a man who had never spoken more than 3 words to her in public. Why would England's most eligible bachelor chase a ruined woman to the edge of the world, risking his own pristine reputation for a scandal that was already consuming her? Rosalie tried to withdraw her hand, the leather of her glove sliding against his palm, but his grip was firm, not trapping her, but anchoring her. The steam whistle shrieked again, a final warning that severed the air between them. "You do not know me, Your Grace," she whispered, her voice fractured by the wind. "And if you did, if you believed even half the lies Lord Halworth has spun, you would not be standing here. I am ruined. I have nothing left to give but my absence." "I know you better than you imagine," Corin replied, stepping closer, heedless of the mud splashing his polished boots. "I have watched you for 2 years, Miss Carn, not just in the ballrooms where you outshone every diamond of the first water, but in the places where you thought you were invisible." He removed his hat, the wind catching his dark chestnut hair, exposing a vulnerability that stole the breath from her lungs. "I saw you slip away from Lady Jersey's garden party to bring food to the crossing sweepers. I was there in the library at the Cowper Ball when you fiercely defended Miss Halloway's right to study mathematics against a room full of laughing gentlemen. You possess a courage and a kindness that this city does not deserve, and that he paused, his Adam's apple bobbing, that I have silently revered." Rosalie stared at him, stunned. He had seen the moments she held most private, the quiet rebellion she thought went unnoticed. "You saw?"
I saw everything, he vowed, and I stayed silent because I am a coward who values propriety over truth. But I cannot be silent while you sail into exile. His eyes searched hers, desperate and sincere. I am not asking to keep you, Rosalie. I am not offering an arrangement. I am asking for the privilege of courting you properly, openly, with the respect you have always been denied. The gangway lurched beneath her feet. The sailors were preparing to cast off. "Last call!" a rough voice bellowed. It was madness. To stay was to walk back into the fire of a society that had already burned her. But looking into Corin's storm-gray eyes, she saw not a predator, but a partner. For the first time in months, she saw hope.
Against every prudent instinct screaming that dukes did not rescue paupers, Rosalie stepped back. She moved off the gangway and onto the solid, wet wood of the dock, standing beside him. Seconds later, the heavy ropes were thrown. The paddle steamer churned the gray water, drifting away into the fog, taking her escape route with it. They stood alone on the pier, a duke and a ruined woman, as the gap between the ship and the shore widened into an abyss. Corin let out a shuddering breath, pulling her hand onto the crook of his arm, shielding her from the curious stares of the dock workers. She was safe from the ocean now, but as they turned back toward the unforgiving streets of London, Rosalie realized with a chill that the true danger had just begun. A duke's devotion might be a shield, or it might simply be a brighter spotlight for the scandal waiting to devour them both. True to his word, Corin did not whisk Rosalie away to a scandalous bachelor's lodging. Instead, he delivered her into the care of Mrs. Hambly, a formidable widow in Bloomsbury whose reputation was as starch-stiff as her caps. While the Duke provided the sanctuary, Rosalie refused to be a passive recipient of his charity. If she was to remain in England, she would not be a kept woman, nor an idle guest. Within days, she secured a position at the St. Jude's School for Foundling Girls. It was a humble establishment, smelling of boiled cabbage and damp wool, but to Rosalie it was a palace of possibility. Here she defied the era's suffocating conviction that the female mind was suited only for embroidery and watercolors. She taught the girls geography, mathematics, and history, subjects usually reserved for their brothers, determined to give them the armor of knowledge she had so desperately needed herself. Corin did not object to her employment. He championed it. His courtship was a masterclass in propriety, designed to shield her from the very scandal their connection invited. He called upon her at Mrs. Hambly's with punctuality that set the clocks, arriving not with trinkets, but with leather-bound volumes of philosophy and poetry. Their afternoons were spent in his high-perch phaeton, navigating the gravel paths of Hyde Park. It was a bold declaration. By driving her during the fashionable hour, he was forcing the ton to acknowledge her not as a pariah, but as the woman seated at a duke's right hand. "You speak of these girls as if they are future prime ministers," Corin remarked one afternoon, guiding his grays through the throng of carriages. His tone held no mockery, only genuine fascination. "And why shouldn't they be?" Rosalie countered, her cheeks flushed with the crisp spring air. "Or at least, why shouldn't they understand the laws that govern them? A woman without education is a traveler without a map, Your Grace. She is entirely at the mercy of the driver." Corin turned to her, his gaze intense. "Then we must ensure you have more maps, Miss Carn. And please, when we are alone, call me Corin." For a moment, the world felt rewritten. He listened to her wild theories on reform with a respect she had never known, validating her intellect where other men had only coveted her face. But the bubble was fragile. As they passed a cluster of mounted gentlemen near the Serentine, the low murmur of conversation reached them. "Is that the Carn girl?" a voice hissed, loud enough to carry. "The one Halworth ruined?" Bold of Calstock to parade his mistress so openly. Rosalie stiffened, the warmth draining from her blood. She saw heads turn, fans snap shut, and the cruel, knowing smiles return. Corin's jaw tightened, his gloved hands gripping the leather until the leather creaked, but the damage was done. The rumors had not died, they had merely been holding their breath. As the whispers swelled around them, Rosalie gripped the side of the carriage, wondering if she had been a fool to trade the clean break of the ocean for a slow public drowning. The weeks that followed were a stolen season of their own, existing in a fragile bubble separate from the sneers of the ton. Their courtship moved from the public spectacle of Hyde Park to the quiet intimacy of moonlit gardens and the hushed sanctuary of Corin's library. It was here, amidst the scent of old paper and beeswax, that the Duke finally shed his armor. "Duty is a cold bedfellow, Rosalie," Corin admitted one rainy evening, staring into the dying embers of the hearth. He looked exhausted, the weight of his estates and the expectations of his peers etching lines around his eyes. "I have spent my life being a symbol, a pillar of the realm. I have thousands of tenants, yet until that day on the dock, I had never felt more alone." Rosalie set down her tea, her heart aching for him. She realized then that he did not just desire her, he needed her. He didn't see a ruined woman or a charity case. He saw an equal, a partner whose mind sharpened his own. "You are not a symbol to me, Corin," she said softly, rising to stand before him. "You are the man who saw me when I was invisible." He looked up, his gaze traversing her face with a reverence that made her knees weak. "And you are the only one who sees the man beneath the title." He stood, closing the distance between them. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the electricity of unspoken things finally finding a voice. "I do not want a duchess who merely looks the part, Rosalie. I want you, your fire, your mind, your heart. You have them. You have had them since the gangway." He groaned low in his throat and cupped her face. His kiss was not the demanding conquest she had feared from men, but a tender, desperate question. It was a meeting of equals, a searing promise that burned through the propriety of the room. Loves, if this moment has you melting, don't let this story vanish like fog on the Thames. Hit subscribe right now so you never miss the next chapter. And if you're tempted to scroll past, imagine regretting it when the climax breaks your heart. Comment below if you absolutely refuse to subscribe. I need to know why. But outside the warmth of the library, the frost was gathering. Across the city, in the smoky corners of White's Club, Lord Halworth was not idle. He had watched Calstock's defiance with a simmering rage. He had paid off maids and bribed stable boys, gathering every scrap of information about the private lessons and unchaperoned moments. He held the evidence in his hand like a weapon, proof of an improper connection that would not just ruin Rosalie again, but drag the Duke down with her. As the candle flickered in Corin's library, the shadow of Halworth's vengeance stretched long and dark toward their door. The Duchess of Richmond's ball was intended to be the glittering apex of the season, a sea of ostrich feathers and diamonds under the blaze of 1,000 candles. But for Rosalie, entering the ballroom on Corin's arm, it felt less like a celebration and more like a trial by fire. She wore emerald silk, a bold, vibrant choice that defied the modest pastels expected of a woman in her precarious position. She held her head high, but the atmosphere was thick with poison. Lord Halworth had been thorough. The whispers that rippled through the crowd were not merely curious, they were condemnatory. The music swelled, a lively reel that jarred against the tension, until Halworth himself stepped into their path near the champagne table. He was flushed with drink and malice, his voice pitching loud enough to cut through the orchestra's strings.
"I must say, Calstock," Halworth sneered, the room falling into a deathly silence around them, "it is a bold innovation to bring one's mistress to a ball of this caliber, though I suppose when one pays for the dress, one expects to display the merchandise." Gasps echoed like gunshots. Corin went rigid, his hands curling into fists, but before he could strike, Rosalie felt a strange calm settle over her. She did not look down, she did not weep. Corin stepped forward, placing himself between Rosalie and her accuser, his presence dominating the room. "You speak of merchandise, Halworth, because you know only the price of things, never their value," he spoke in a low, terrifyingly controlled voice, carrying to every corner of the silenced hall. "You see a woman you try to destroy. I see a lady of unblemished honor, whose mind and spirit eclipse every title in this room. I do not stand here with a mistress. I stand here with the future of my heart, and I will defend her name against your lies until the stars burn out." The declaration hung in the air, shocking and absolute. Then Rosalie stepped out from behind the shield of his body. She did not shout. She spoke with the quiet authority of a queen.
"My lord speaks of reputation," she said, her eyes meeting Halworth's with pity rather than anger. "But reputation is merely the story others tell about you. Character is the truth you live. You have spent your energy tearing down a woman with no defense but her truth. If that is what passes for nobility in London, then I am proud to be in exile." For a heartbeat, the room teetered on the edge of ruin. Then, the formidable Dowager Countess of Leven, the arbiter of all things proper, tapped her cane on the floor and nodded once at Rosalie. The dam broke. The crowd turned their backs on Halworth, leaving him isolated in his malice, and the orchestra nervously resumed. They had won the night, but as Corin led her onto the balcony, his hand trembling in hers, Rosalie wondered if the cost of such a public battle was the privacy of their love, or if the scandal was now a permanent third party in their courtship. The retreat to Cornwall was not a flight, but a homecoming. Far from the choking coal smoke of the capital, the air at Calstock smelled of salt spray and wild thyme. It was here, on a jagged cliff edge overlooking the churning Atlantic, that Corin fondly asked the question that had hovered between them since the Thames. He did not kneel in the wildflowers. He stood beside her, facing the horizon, offering his hand as he had on the dock. "I offered you a chance," he murmured, the wind whipping his coat. "Now I wish to offer you a lifetime, not as my shadow, Rosalie, but as my breath." They married in the village church in the spring of 1819, a ceremony so quiet Button barely had time to gossip before it was done. But their return to London for the wedding breakfast was a declaration of war on convention. Instead of a stuffy gathering of exclusive peers, the halls of Calstock House were thrown open to poets, reformers, and the very educators Rosalie championed. It was a celebration not of lineage, but of vision. The marriage that followed was a partnership in the truest sense. While Corin waged battles in the House of Lords, fighting for parliamentary reform with a vigor that stunned his formerly complacent peers, Rosalie built her own empire of compassion. She co-founded 3 schools for foundling girls within 5 years, ensuring that the next generation of women would have the tools to write their own stories. The Duke's Library became their shared command center, 2 desks facing one another, messy with legislative drafts and lesson plans. The silence of the great house was soon broken by the chaotic joy of 4 children. 3 sons arrived in quick succession, inheriting their father's gray eyes and their mother's kindness. But it was their youngest, a daughter with auburn curls and a refusal to sit still, who most resembled the woman who once nearly sailed for America. They raised them to value truth over title, filling the nursery with laughter and globes rather than just toy soldiers. Under their care, the Calstock estates flourished, becoming a model of tenant welfare and agricultural innovation.
Yet time is a thief that respects no happiness. As the Georgian era waned and the Victorian age dawned, the golden light of their early years began to soften into the longer shadows of middle age. Illness struck the nursery, political defeats tested Corin's resolve, the world shifted around them with industrial speed. As the decades accumulated, marking their faces with the lines of shared burdens, the question remained, could a love born of a desperate impulse on a foggy dock truly withstand the slow erosion of time? The years moved not with the frantic pace of a London season, but with the steady, rhythmic tide of the Cornish sea. Their golden anniversary was celebrated not with a grand ball, but with a quiet evening in the library where their hearts had first been laid bare. Rosalie, now a celebrated essayist on women's rights, sat across from Corin, watching him read her latest pamphlet with a pride that had never dimmed. The ink on the page was her voice, but the confidence to use it had been nurtured by his unwavering belief. They often spoke of the fog. It was their private mythology, the terrifying hinge upon which their entire universe turned. "I was so close to vanishing," she whispered one evening, tracing the veins on his weathered hand. "I was a ghost already." Corin kissed her knuckles, his grip gentler now, but just as possessive as it had been on that wet timber. "And I was a man asleep. That plea on the dock didn't just stop a ship, Rosalie. It started a life." When the end came for Corin in 1868, it was peaceful. He departed this world holding the very hand he had refused to let go of 50 years prior, whispering his gratitude for the chance she gave him. Rosalie followed him 4 years later, not in loneliness, but surrounded by a legion of children, grandchildren, and the hundreds of young women whose minds she had ignited at the schools they built together. Darlings, if this ending has tears in your eyes, don't risk missing the next epic romance. Subscribe now before you forget and regret it forever. And if your finger hovers but won't click, please come confess in the comments why you'd break my heart like that. Their story did not die with them. It became a whispered legend in progressive circles, a bedtime story told to spirited daughters about the duke who begged and the lady who dared to stay. It stood as proof that true partnership required neither submission nor dominance, only the courage to be equals.
And time spins on. Decades later, a young woman stands at a modern ferry terminal, the wind whipping her hair as she clutches a ticket to a new life. She is afraid to stay, yet afraid to go. Then she remembers the family legend, the great-grandparents who rewrote destiny in the mist. She takes a breath, drops her bag, and turns back toward the city, wondering if she too dares to take a chance on a love that asks her to stay.